in this area. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
I call the Honourable Member Rajan Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to take a call on this bill, Mr. Speaker. I spoke very positively about this at the first reading because it was addressing, it is addressing and has addressed a real concern that a number of us had heard about and had seen examples of relating to donations for charitable purposes, where all of the money intended for the charitable purpose of our organisation did not get there. It's also refreshing, Mr. Speaker, the juxtaposition of the two bills this one and the one before is remarkable. Remarkable for the passion that one has in this bill that Amy Adams, Honourable Lady Adams, when she first introduced it, brought to the bill, brought to her private member's bill, and indeed the one preceding this that we have discussed, which seemed to have been some going through the motions, and as others have quite justifiably said, which seemed one of the worst ways of addressing what ought to be addressed in an omnibus bill. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, this is a good bill, and it comes at a time when many charities rely to a large extent on donations from a very giving New Zealand public. And currently there are no rules. There are no rules about what needs to happen to make sure that the money collected actually gets to where it was assumed the money will go. So the abuse, the potential for abuse in the current system is enormous, and indeed abuse has occurred, and it has become big business. This particular area. The 2002 Consumer Magazine conducted an inquiry into the Children at Risk Education Foundation, CARE, and found that 75 cents in every dollar of donations was going to the telemarketing company. I mean, that's enormous. It can only be described as a rort, that such a small fraction of what is raised actually ends up with the particular charity. And yet it was feelings for that particular charity that generated the donations in the first place. The issue was again raised in the media as a result of Epilepsy New Zealand's decision to cut ties with fundraiser the Epilepsy Foundation. In the last 3 years, according to Epilepsy New Zealand, the Epilepsy Foundation gathered $2.82 million in donations on their behalf through telemarketing. And approximately $2.1 million of this went straight back to the telemarketers. I mean, that's a rort in anybody's language. So it's a business, it's unconscionable behaviour. And so the pleasure that I'm sure with this side of the House has, we all have, in supporting this bill and its provisions is there. The telethon, TV3, for the benefit of KidsCan Charitable Trust, was also in the spotlight for claims that less than 20% raised was passed through to disadvantaged children. So 80% there went to telemarketers. And TVNZ's show Dancing with the Stars was also caught up in controversy, where just 60% of the money raised for the charities by contestants actually made it to recipients. So what this bill does is addresses a very, very real problem, and it's good to see this bill come back from the Select Committee. The Select Committee process is the next matter I want to address, Mr. Speaker. I mean, it has fundamentally changed the bill, obviously quite a lot of detailed thinking went through in the Select Committee by officials and by the advisors to that Select Committee, where the original bill, Mr. Speaker, was about disclosing how much was retained. Clearly, an inappropriate mechanism had not been thought through as to how that could actually happen. And the Select Committee in the proposals it has come up with in this bill, the amendments, actually has addressed that. Perhaps perhaps it's not unusual, Mr. Speaker, that a private member's bill will not have thought through the nitty-gritty of how a piece of an idea or an intent might be unpacked into legislation. So the Select Committee in this case has done a great job in putting its mind to the task, and it has thought through how the bill's purposes could be achieved. So the Select Committee has amended the bill, Mr. Speaker, to enact a regulation making powers relating to disclosure by those who raise funds. So it'll be regulations now that will decide, that will determine exactly how it is, and the bill sets the framework for that. And when the regulations come out, Mr. Speaker, they will direct how in a particular case the rules are to work out. So this essentially what the Select Committee has done in the amendments is designed a system for the purpose of the bill to be met. So I congratulate the Select Committee for doing that work and for thinking through the purposes of the Act in that particular way. But, Mr. Speaker, there are two other matters I wanted to refer to. One is that some matters are so important that there ought to be government measures. And this is one of them. The last bill that we went through here was also such a matter. And there are other areas in fair trading that are currently being looked at. And one would have thought that these matters would have been put together and government would have taken charge of the whole package of rules and regulations and laws that need to be amended, the system that needed to be redesigned and brought back together in a comprehensive kind of way. And I think there is another private member's bill before the House, before Select Committee, where that's been parked for very, very similar reasons. And so it could have happened in this particular case. And sometimes it's useful for ministers to think that through, particularly ministers with responsibilities in the area. That hasn't happened in this particular case. Fortunately, Mr. Speaker, this bill will go through committee stages. So we will have an opportunity to go through and have a look at that and understand that and make any amendments as the committee of the House. The last bill, interesting enough, not commented on, did not have any committee stages. That also kind of reflects the irony of the situation of the bill that we discussed prior to this one. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to raise one other matter that is on my mind. I note that the provisions of the bill show the framework for the regulation-making powers. But, Mr. Speaker, as I've read through that, I just wondered what were the sanctions if somebody did not comply with those particular regulations. So at some point, Mr. Speaker, maybe in the committee stages, or perhaps the next speaker, or perhaps the member in charge of the bill might just clarify that for me as to what is the process by which non-compliance will be dealt with, and what will be the sanctions. Are they to be in the regulations? If so, should that not be in one of the amendments or the clauses? Or is it something taken as read? Or should there be a particular clause that we should look at in the committee stages where the sanctions are discussed? So, Mr. Speaker, this side is very pleased to be supporting this bill, a genuine private member's bill, somebody who feels passionately about the kinds of things that have obviously come before Honourable Amy Adams, and she's brought that here and given us the opportunity to discuss this. We've all, as members of Parliament, have had this experience, and here we are at a fairly advanced stage now, taking a bill through its procedures, and I think it is what the Select Committee has done is a great job, and I hope that the final piece is addressed, and I'm sure it will end up as a very good piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find myself